Day 4 of the 2024 U.S. Senior and U.S. Junior Championships saw some dramatic turnarounds as we entered the middle stretch of all three tournaments. Starting with the U.S. Senior, top seed and clear leader Vladimir Akopian drew his game today against Gregory Kaidanov. The only winner was Larry Christiansen, as he defeated Alexander Shabalov to move into sole second place with 2.5 out of 4, a full point behind Akopian on 3.5. In the U.S. Junior, Jasmine Wang took down the leader Justin Wang, allowing both Christopher Yu and Andy Woodward to get back to the shared lead. Justin, Christopher, and Woodward are now all tied for first with 3 out of 4. Next up in the U.S. Girls Junior, National Master Jasmine Su continued her stellar run, defeating a key rival in Iris Mu to move to 3.5 out of 4. Jasmine leads by a full point ahead of Yasmin Asani and FM Rose Atwell, who won as well today against FIDE Master Zoe Tang. Going into the games, we'll start with the game between Kaidanov and Akopian. This one started off as a Slav defense with d takes c4, and the players actually entered a very theoretical line, g3 e5, bishop f4 knight d7, and now this move g5 knight e3. This is all theory that has been known for many years, leading to a very sharp position, typically with opposite sides castling, although we saw a little bit of a different continuation here in this game. Knight c5, rook to d1, Kaidanov here being very well prepared. Many moves played here in his preparation. He still had over 2 hours on the clock. Here after check, queen takes b2. The players entered this endgame, where it seems like white is a bit better, especially after black's move a6. Seemed to give white some chances here after rook b1 and knight a4, maybe king to d3, playing against this knight. Instead we saw rook to b3, king c7. And once again, white did have some chances here to press for an advantage after bishop c4. Here a key maneuver seems to be rook to a3 hitting the knight, followed by rook back to e1, rook to g1, and then rook to g7. Might have given white some chances here as well. But overall, this endgame does seem pretty drawish with the presence of opposite-colored bishops. This is what ended up happening after e4, knight c5. Some pawns get traded off here. Knight d6, but trading off the pawns. At this point, neither side really has any more winning chances, and the players soon did liquidate to just an absolutely completely dead-drawn endgame with the opposite-colored bishops. 2 extra pawns for white, but no way to ever break through on the dark squares. Black just has a lifelong blockade here. So this is the first draw for Akopian, as he goes to 3.5 out of 4 and maintains a very clear lead in the U.S. Senior. The only win of the round in the U.S. Senior was scored by GM Larry Christiansen against Alexander Shabalov. This game saw a very aggressive e3 line of the Nimzo by Shaba. And Larry reacts pretty typically here with bishop a6, knight to c6. We get a very double-edged position out of the opening, with white having the big space advantage and the bishop pair. But these weak pawns on the c-file definitely very long-term weaknesses. Here Christiansen goes for knight b3 and knight takes c1. Interesting decision to just trade off white's bishop at the cost of several tempi. But black definitely gets a decent game here, especially after e5. Here the engines were saying white should play either castles or f4 with an approximately balanced position. Shabalov takes on e5. After takes f4, queen c5, and e5. It's a good chance he underestimated Christiansen's response here, just castling queenside. Now the point is that if white takes this knight on f6, black will have rook to e8, and black is just crushing on the e-file, for example, bishop to e4. Black takes on c4 with tempo, followed by d5. Black will win back the piece, and white's king is just not getting out of the center. White is completely busted here. So after castles, white can't take the knight on f6, plays knight to g5, probably should have bailed out here with queen to f2, or it seemed like black is a little bit better in the endgame. It's a knight to g5 was seen, but now rook to e8, very nice move, offering white this f-pawn so that black will just play rook to f8, knight comes back to g5, and here black just has total compensation for the pawn. All kinds of ideas with d6, h6, knight h5 as well, very strong, going after white's weaknesses here. The point being, if queen takes h5, there's queen e3 check, where black hits the rook, hits the bishop, wins all the material back, and white is once again just totally lost here. So in the game, Shabalov plays king to d2, obviously a sign that things have gone very, very wrong for white. And Christiansen, absolutely fantastic in the attack. D6 here, king to b8, knight to d7. And the problem for white is that his king, his pawns are just way too weak in the long run, and black just has so many advantages here. The game saw knight c5, rook d8, knight a4 check, and now b5. And yeah, white's king here simply didn't last for very long. e6 was tried, but now g5. Hitting the queen can't really leave the defense of the c4 square. That'll be mate. And after knight to e5, we see knight c5 check, gf4, takes. Black ends up with an extra piece in the endgame, and Christiansen went on to win a few moves from here. Moving on to the US Junior, we'll take a look at the critical game between the leader, Justin Wang, against Jason Wang, who so far hasn't done as well in the event. This one started off as a Catalan, and actually it was black that was the one that got an advantage out of the opening here. After this move, knight to b5, white plays for the two bishops, but this ends up backfiring. dc4, knight d6, takes, queen takes. Now bishop to d5, knight c6, and queen to d7. All of black's pieces getting into the game, the queen heading to b7. And white's bishop pair seems to be totally neutralized in this position. In fact, if anyone is better, it's actually black here. Once the light square bishops get traded off, white will be left with kind of a bad bishop on e3. And in general, black is doing quite well here. A plan of like rook e8 and e5, for example. So knight e1, rook c8 played, f3. b5, and now e5, black overtaking the initiative here. And soon things go even worse for white. After knight f5, bishop c5, and now e4, black's pieces just totally dominating here in the center. Knight to b4, takes, bishop c4. Jason in the post-game interview wasn't totally convinced of his advantage here, but the engines do like his position very, very much. Takes on e2. Black manages to hold on to the extra pawn here. And eventually white does win the pawn back, but at the cost of the light squares on the king side. b4 here, knight to e4, and takes. This position actually completely winning for black. As white has issues with the king, the knight on a1 of course is out of play. The b pawn is a weakness. And yeah, knight to d4, for example, knight f3 check coming. White's king is in for a lot of pain. The game concluded after bishop takes b4. Black found the nice trick, queen d1 check, queen back to d4. Picking up a piece, and here white resigned as of course it's game over. So with that win, the tournament really does completely open up in the US Juniors. Now we have 3 co-leaders, all on 3 out of 4 in this one. Another very, very exciting game in the US Junior took place between Brewington Hardaway against Balaji Daggupati. This one happened to be in a very theoretical line of the Sveshnikov with knight to d5. Takes, knight e7, c4. We saw this variation played out quite a bit in the 2018 World Championship match between Fabiano Caruana and Magnus Carlsen. Saw them explore these structures quite a bit. And apparently in this game, Balaji comes up with a very, very interesting novelty, e4, sacrificing a very important e-pawn in order to get this diagonal and look for long-term compensation. And the opening was quite interesting here after g6, g4, a6, knight to h4. Black here playing very, very quickly. Brewington definitely having to spend a lot of time to figure out what's going on. He continues in a very direct way, f5. Black plays b5, looking for a queenside counterplay. And now c5. And at this point, Balaji takes a very long think. Likely this is his first move out of book. According to the engines, b4 was the move here for black in order to keep the game very unbalanced, followed by d takes c5. And yeah, we just have an incredibly sharp position on our hands. White will have a strong d pawn, but the king is weak. And so yeah, very double-edged position. Instead, we saw dc5, but now just the immediate d6 opening up the bishop. And this position, very, very nice for white. Bishop to f4, all the pieces supporting this massive pawn on d6. However, the story definitely doesn't end there. g5, rook d7, and now bishop to d5, actually a serious mistake from white. Should have played something like king to h1, getting out of the bishop d4 check, because after bishop d5, black gives check, king to h1. Now just rook takes d6, very natural exchange sacrificed, giving up the rook for a pawn and control over the dark squares on the king side. At this point, black now has the advantage, but the position remains very, very complicated. Very easy to go wrong here for either side. After b4, queen f6, Now white starts to get the initiative once again. Takes on c3, takes on d7. Rook takes e4. Black has 2 pieces for the rook, but here comes queen c8 check, and rook to d8. It looks like white is getting some big attack against the king, but now knight to g6. Excellent find here by Balaji, taking advantage of the pin on the f-file, and the knight defends the king. If rook to g8 check, then king to h6, and there's no queen f8 check. It turns out white is actually losing here, as it's white's king that is soon going to be in danger. Instead, rook to d6 is played. In this point, black only had one move here, queen to e7, to hold on to the advantage. Here white should probably play f6 check, bishop takes f6, rook takes f6, then black has a move rook to f4, keeping the advantage. Once again, there's going to be all kinds of queen e4 checks, and so on. Apparently very, very complicated position, but game would certainly continue. Instead, Balaji blunders with queen to e5, overlooking that after f6 check, king to h6, white would have the simple move queen to g8, which actually just ends the game, as queen to g7, such a powerful threat. Black has to give the queen on f6 in order to stalemate. But of course, this would not change the result, and white is completely winning. So big win for Brewington as he turns this one around and gets to a +4, just a half point out of first place, with 2.5 out of 4. Moving on to the US Girls Junior, here we have the game between Jasmine Su and Iris Mu, and this one started off as a Karo Khan, with white getting a bit of an advantage out of the opening, although in general, this is considered to be a very, very solid structure for black. But after queen f3, h3, very logical play from both sides, knight to f1, queen drops back, and eventually white goes bishop f4, trading off the dark scored bishops. Here after queen d6, queen f3, black plays this move b5, which probably is a pretty serious mistake. Instead, knight to g6 here, and the game continues. Black has a very, very solid position. After b5, c5, queen c7, looks like black is getting the d5 score for the bishop. The bishop to e4, white is there first. And apparently bishop to c4 was the only way for black to hold the balance somewhat. But here white would play rook takes c4. The point is that if bishop takes c6, there's bishop to e2. Very unpleasant move. So white would sacrifice the exchange first on c4. And after rook takes c4, it takes bishop c6. For example, rook e7, knight e3. White would definitely have a nice position here. Lots of compensation for the exchange, very strong pawns in the center. C-pawn, of course, being a big target as well. After bishop e4, black played the more natural bishop to d5. But here's the issue, white takes on d5. And if c takes d5, then the c-pawn is just very, very strong. White has a huge strategic advantage here. After rook takes d5, knight to e3. If this rook drops back, then white is immediately breaking through with d5 and taking black's outpost off of the table. Here after d5, white is just doing extremely well. For example, takes. You can push c6, you can recapture on d5 with the knight, and white's c-pawn is just very, very strong near white's pieces. Perfectly placed to support this one. Engines already think white has a decisive advantage. So after knight e3, black decides to sacrifice the exchange with rook to d8. But of course, there's not going to be enough compensation here. Black doesn't even have one pawn for this, and eventually the rooks should outplay the knight. Iris defended this one quite well, but Jasmine's technique was definitely too good. She takes the pawn on b4, gives the pawn on c5, but after queen c2, rook to c4. The problem for black is that white's heavy pieces here are just way too strong. The knight really can't fight against the rooks for very long. And it took some time, but Jasmine's technique here was definitely good enough, as eventually she does take it into the endgame, and she does manage to convert this one, eventually by simply promoting her pass d-pawn and winning the game that way. With this win, Jasmine moves to 3.5 out of 4. She actually has a full point lead ahead of her nearest 2 rivals. One of those rivals is, of course, FM Rose Atwell, who managed to win today's game from a very difficult position against Zoe Tang. Here playing black, Zoe could have played the move rook takes c2, winning a second extra pawn in the position. The engines do think that black has a decisive advantage here. Of course, it's not easy as white always has this c-pawn, but long term, black's 4 versus 3 on the king side seem that they should probably decide the game. Instead, we saw f4 check, king to d3, and now bishop to a6. First glance looks great for black winning the exchange, but white has knight d5 check, and now c4. And unexpectedly, if you take this rook on b5, and after c takes b5, white's two connected passers on the queen side are very strong. In fact, this endgame was actually already winning for white. So instead we saw rook to f2, but now c6, white's c-pawn here getting very, very dangerous. Apparently was still holding for black. For example, move like king to g4, king to g5, getting away from any knight checks. Apparently black is still fine there, but very, very difficult to hold this one. We saw rook to a3, c7 in the game. Now king to g5 was apparently the only move. Once again, getting the king out of any checks, possibly supporting the kingside pawns in the future. Instead we saw king e6, but now king to b2, rook b6 check, and c5, and white's queenside counterplay is winning her the game. The threat is rook d6 check, kicking the king away from the pawn, and then rook takes a6 to promote the pawn. If the king goes to c8, then it's simply going to be rook d8 check, followed by promoting the pawn, as the king is going to be blocking the bishop. And at this point black has no way of stopping the pawns without giving up lots of material. That's what ended up happening after rook to c4, check, takes on a6, rook takes c5, white has already won the bishop. After check and promotes, very precise, takes knight to b6 check, white is also winning the rook. Now black tried to survive with, of course, the 4 pawns on the king side. Sometimes these endgames can be very, very tricky, but white's king here is simply way too close, and of course white has too much material. So knight to e7, if f2, then the rook can get behind the pawn with rook to f8. Black tried king to d6. Now there's lots of ways to win here for white. In fact, you could even play knight to g8, followed by rook f8, keeping all the material, and this should be winning. Taking on g6 also possible. Barroza's solution is quite practical. She just brings the king in. King c3, takes, king d3, and the problem for black is that these pawns are a little bit too extended. The king is not close enough, and white is slowly going to pick up one by one. So g5, king e3, g4, rook check and takes on h7, king to g5, and now rook to h1. Very nice move, indicating that black is actually in a zugzwang here. Any move that black makes is either going to lose a pawn or allow white to make more progress. So king to f5 was played. Now check, king f6, otherwise white would take the pawn. And king to f2, another very, very nice maneuver, simply running black out of moves. If king to e6, for example, white can go rook to g5 and take this one. If the king moves this way, then white is taking on e5. And in the game we saw e4. And now just rook to a5. And once again, black is in zugzwang. The king has to move somewhere, and this allows white to put the rook behind one of the pawns and win it. So king e6, rook to g5, and the game ended in just a couple more moves, as soon black does end up losing all the pawns here. Check, king takes e4, and this was met with resignation. So Rose is now one of 2 players on 2.5 out of 4, a full point behind the leader, Jasmine Su. Meanwhile, Alice Lee, the top seed, did draw her game today, so she is on an even score to a 2 out of 4, a full 1.5 points behind the leader. She will of course have a lot of work to do if she wants to catch up and try to fight for the national title.
Thank you for watching the video. Don't forget to give us a like and subscribe.